Its strength, Boromir, is too great for anyone to wield at will, save only those who have already a great power of their own. But for them it holds an even deadlier peril. The very desire of it corrupts the heart, and that is another reason why the ring should be destroyed. As long as it is in the world, it will be a danger even to the wise, for nothing is evil in the beginning. Soul Ring, emblem of the format. Only card to be printed in almost every single commander deck released. The bane of the first turn. It's been here from the very beginning of Magic. It's banned in Legacy, restricted in Vintage. Why is it such a problem even compared to green land ramp spells? Why do many argue it should be on the Game Changer list, or even banned like Mana Crypt? Everywhere you look, you will find Soul Ring discourse. Many people vilify it, while others celebrate it as one of the most iconic cards in the format. But no matter what side you sit on at that particular table, there is rarely any disagreement that it is powerful. Mortals, immortals, and friends from the blind eternities, my name is Samson Loreseeker, and today we will be discussing the importance of mana breakpoints, ramp in Magic the Gathering, and why Soul Ring sits at the pinnacle of the game as the Ring of the King. What exactly do I mean by mana breakpoints? How I will be using it in this video is my personal definition, which is, quote, the mana value at which certain things happen. Yes, this is a vague definition, I admit, but once I start talking about examples, it will make a bit more sense. At 1 mana, one does not expect much. Most cards that are played at 1 mana fall into 3 categories: setup, removal, and aggression. Setup includes mana sources, life gain, or card draw. Removal is stuff like push, path, and bolt. And aggression sees the least play in this slot, with the exception of things like Ragavan, Sarah's Ascendant, or Knight of the Ebon Legion. 2 mana usually sees more of the interaction side of things, or more valuable setup pieces. 3 is the threshold where one transitions from setup to more bomb-type categories, and from 4 onward you get heavier and heavier haymakers. As always, there are exceptions to this rule. There are over 27,000 unique individual cards in the game after all. There will always be cards to cherry-pick for any argument. But in this video, I will be talking in large generalizations about categories. For the sake of simplicity, you can just think of mana breakpoints as a scale. The higher the number, the better stuff you're going to be able to do. Not just casting bigger spells, but being able to do things like double spell or hold up interaction. All incredibly important things to be able to do in a game of Magic that vastly increases your chances of winning. Unless you're playing hyper-competitive CEDH, it's unlikely that the player who only ever has 3 mana will win against an opponent who has 6 mana. If there's an interest in me diving more into each individual breakpoint value and discussing the possibilities of each, well, let me know in the comments and I'll look into producing a series discussing it. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple. The more mana you have, the better you're off. You don't even really need me to understand that. So, now let's talk about ramp spells. To keep things simple, I will be focusing on the classic green ones. White ramp is more focused on catching up. Blue ramp is mainly mana rocks and high tide, and one of those 2 options I will be discussing later. Black and red have rituals and sacrificial ramp for the most part, and also dip into rocks a little bit, and then green has the standard ramp package. For the most part, if a deck has green, it will run green ramp spells over mana rocks. There are exceptions to this, I know. So let's discuss the ramp spells you get at the various breakpoints. At 1 mana, you will find 3 categories of spells. There's Crop Rotation and Lay of the Land, whose effects find a land and either put it into your hand or onto the battlefield if you sacrifice a land. Yes, you can ramp if you find a thing like Ancient Tomb off of Crop Rotation. The next category of ramp spells at 1 mana are things like Burgeoning, Exploration, or Arboreal Grazer. These are conditional ramp, as they require you to have more lands in your hand when they get played. They can be quite powerful effects, but only if you have those extra lands, since they on their own don't find more lands. The third type are the Mana Dorks. Llanowar Elves, Birds of Paradise, the Hierarchs, 1 mana creatures that tap for 1 mana. Simple, efficient, effective, and vastly more common than burgeoning or exploration. At 2 mana, you find Rampant Growth, 3 Visits, Farseek, and Nature's Lore. These spells all go and search your library for 1 land and put it into play with no sacrificing needed. There are more mana dorks at this level too, and they typically have more survivability than the 1 mana ones. Hexproof, more toughness, some can even produce more than 1 mana, but only after certain conditions are met. And of course, there's, well, Devoted Druid. But for the most part, 2 mana ramps you by 1. At 3 mana, you get a Divide. On one hand, Cultivate and Kodama's Reach are the most commonly seen ramp spells at 3. They're the ones that find you 2 lands, after all, even if only 1 gets put into play off of the spell. Almost all of the other 3 mana ramp spells find you a single land, albeit with another benefit tacked on like a token of some kind or a scry. There are also the various Harrow effects that sacrifice a land to find 2, but that really only nets you 1 extra mana. At 4 mana, you get the Explosive Vegetation effects that go and get you 2 lands into play without a downside. This is generally where most decks that aren't predominantly green and or lands decks tap out. They may run 1 or 2 of these, but beyond this mana value they feel they've usually ramped enough. Beyond 4 mana you start to get into the excessive ramp, like Traverse the Outlands or Jaheira's Respite. The ramp becomes conditional, with a very low floor, finding 1 or 0 lands for 5 mana, or it has the highest ceiling, finding 10 to 20 lands in a single cast. I'd also do a disservice if I didn't at least mention Tempt with Discovery. In general, you should never take this tempting offer, as while it doesn't cost you anything to ramp, it will end up ramping your opponent way past the same breakpoint. Finally, there are the X-ramp spells. There aren't a lot of these that see play, but they are worth mentioning, especially Open the Way. They're usually pretty variable in the amount of land that they find, slotting anywhere into the curve with ease. There really isn't a whole lot to say about them though. They are completely functional, but not as common as the main ones. So now that we have generally covered the various green ramp spells, let's take a look at what they give you as compared to a deck running no ramp at all. At 1 mana, in general, you spend a mana to get a mana. As a result, on turn 2, if both parties play a land, where a normal deck has 2 mana, you have 3 in up to 3 different colors. The exceptions to this are Burgeoning and Exploration, which can net you usually around 4 mana on turn 2. However, this requires you to have 4 of the 9 cards you will see in the beginning 2 turns of the game to be lands. There's also something important to say about mana dorks being vulnerable. There's a reason that the statement Bolt the Bird is so prevalent. Killing a mana dork is usually a worthwhile effort, as some people will bank their whole strategy on that keeping them in the game. How many people have kept 2 lands, a mana dork, and a cultivate? If they don't draw a land and the dork gets killed, they may never recover for the entire match. At 2 mana in general, you get 1 more mana that's a bit more protected, either being a land or having a benefit that keeps it from being removed. If both parties play a land on turn 3, then you would be untapping with 4 mana while they have 3. In general, players seem to keep hands that have 2 to 3 lands, so this result is usually a pretty safe bet. Either they kept 3 lands or they drew a third. 3 mana, for the most part, puts a single extra land out. Unless, you're playing elves and have all those ridiculous mana dorks at 3. As the examples have shown, it continues on a similar trend. Turn 4 you untap with 5 mana. This is consistent as long as it's Cultivate or Kodamas that you've cast, as it puts the extra land into your hand to make the next land drop. All the spells that find you a single land are a little less consistent in that regard, as you won't necessarily draw or have drawn the land to play. And 4 mana spells get you 2 onto the field, jumping you to 6 mana on turn 5. The trend holds. All of these examples have shown that on their own, completely by themselves, these spells will put you 1 turn ahead of everyone else. This is definitely the main reason why all of these spells are the most commonly played ramp spells. They consistently give you the bonus of skipping a turn of land drops while fixing your mana colors. The fact that these spells all have a couple copies that do the same thing helps decks with consistency, letting these green decks regularly have the same curve out each time. This was all by themselves though, and these decks never run just 1 of these cards. This is where those breakpoints become relevant, and skipping a turn of land drops becomes such a big deal for acceleration. Having 3 mana on turn 2 means that you can have 5 mana on turn 3 by curving an elf into a cultivate. Having 4 mana on turn 3 after a rampant growth means you can have 6 mana on turn 4. These jumps compound and can result in pretty powerful mana bases early on. I touched on this in my Villainy and Commander video, which will be linked in the description, where I discussed how the main evil of green is how fast and excessively it can ramp. These ramp spells allow players to jump ahead and get to playing bombs sooner than the rest of the table if they remain uncontested. And as most players are doing their own setup at these early breakpoints, they will be more focused on other things than stopping others from ramping. Plus, it's generally frowned upon to interfere with ramp. So now let's talk rocks. Mana rocks are where most non-green decks get the ramp from, and some green decks too, for that matter. And for the most part, these rocks follow similar rules to the green ramp spells, albeit with some substantial advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, with a few Alaran exceptions, they're colorless, meaning you don't need to ensure you have the right colored lands in your hand to play them. While it's not usually a thought-about problem, when it is a problem, you will be quite viciously reminded about it. However, the biggest and most drastic downside is that they are significantly easier to be removed, and it may not even be that intentional on the part of the remover. You are far more likely to see Vandal Blast or Brotherhood's End than you are to see an Armageddon. Even if you are not the threat the person tries to stop, your mana rocks are likely to be caught as collateral, much more than your lands will be. This is why so many people tell you not to run mana rocks in a green deck, just run land ramp instead. The other main downside is that colorless land ramp will lie about its cost. Wayfarer's Bauble will find a land and put it onto the battlefield on turn 2, yes, but it took 2 turns and 3 mana to make it happen. Burnished Heart finding 2 basics is fantastic, but it took 2 turns and 6 mana to do. The trade-off is that this is much more easily recurable than a regular ramp spell. You can Goblin Welder a Burnished Heart over and over, but you can only Snapcaster an Explosive Vegetation once before it's gone forever. And let's be real, you won't be snapping those veggies. You'll rebuy a counterspell or a removal spell instead, trading efficiency for repeatability. But in general, when it comes to mana rocks that tap, it's generally the same trend as the ramp spells. 2 mana gets you to 4 on turn 3, 3 mana gets you to 5 on turn 4, etc. The main exceptions are when it comes to colorless mana. Worn Power Stone or Thran Dynamo, these trade off producing colored mana for instead producing more mana but colorless. With this all established, let's get to what everybody wants to hear. Let's talk about Sol Ring. Turn 1 Sol Ring. One of the most hated statements in Magic when it's not you saying it. Some of you listening probably grimaced hearing me say that. Alright, so why is it so bad? Well, to start off, let's turn to the breakpoints. With the exception of Burgeoning and Exploration, who had the requirements of having 4 of the cards in your opening hands being lands, 1 mana ramp spells will usually get you to 3 mana on turn 2. By itself, Sol Ring will get you to 4 mana on turn 2. Now I will say that the mana dorks do have the possibility to produce 3 colors, while, on its own, Sol Ring will usually only have 2 colors available. There are exceptions to that as well, but I don't want to get too off topic getting into the weeds. But regardless, this immediately makes it so that a majority of Commander players can get their commanders out on turn 2, as the average mana value for a commander these days is 3 or 4. But beyond that, this jump to 4 drastically changes the speed at which other ramp happens, because if they run the green ramp spells, this can have them jumping to 6 mana by turn 3, where an Elf into a Cultivate only gets you to 5 mana by turn 3. If instead of an Explosive Vegetation spell, it's a Nature's Lore and a Cultivate that they've got in hand, they will be able to cast both, as Nature's Lore puts the forest in untapped, putting the player up to 7 mana instead by turn 3, shooting way ahead of everyone else, who may only be putting their 3rd land into play at this point. Remember the breakpoints I was discussing. Most people are playing setup creatures or spells at mana value 1 or 2. And most removal at 1 mana is creature-based. Even if you are running an Abrade or a Disenchant at 2, if the Sol Ring player is before you in turn order, you could still be seeing them have 5 mana on turn 3 even after you spend your turn destroying their Sol Ring. And things like Reclamation Sage or Loran dropping on turn 3 would be too late to stop your opponent from dropping something truly massive onto the board, because they've essentially skipped 3 to 4 turns ahead of you on the mana curve. But there's another very important aspect about the Sol Ring that it has over other ramp. It comes in untapped, and it doesn't have Summoning Sickness. Mana rocks at 2 typically net 1 mana, and Sol Ring just so happens to produce 2 colorless mana. A Soul Ring into any of the Ravnica signets will enable someone to play a 5-mana commander with up to 5 colors on turn 2 with the right combination of lands and rocks. Is that Magical Christmas Land? Yeah, it is, but even without that perfect hand, it's pretty safe to assume that someone would be able to play a 3-color 5-mana commander on turn 2 with a Soul Ring signet start. Sure, blowing up the Soul Ring at that point will still slow them down, but it's a bit of a moot point then, as they've already dropped a real haymaker on the field. There's a reason that a Soul Ring into a signet is one of the fastest and most surefire ways to become the archenemy at the table. But that's not all. There's still even more that can occur with a turn 1 Soul Ring. Remember that at the 1 and 2 mana breakpoints, most people's interaction will sit there. A turn 1 Soul Ring will allow a player to set up a piece and keep up interaction as well, especially if a signet is involved. They can drop a Rhystic Study and keep up a counterspell. They can slap down a Blood Moon or a Winter Orb and keep up protection. They can Wheel of Fortune and potentially ruin the rest of the game for you. Even if you take your turns off from setting up to try and stop them or slow them down, they may have the ability to stop you, in which case they've slowed you down even further by wasting your turn. Showing up later than turn 1 does drastically decrease the sting of the ring, though. Other people have been given the chance to set up, and it's less likely that the person will be able to run away with the game, as the bombs that open up to them will likely match the general level everyone else is playing at that point. I've never heard anyone complain about Soul Ring on a turn 5 or 6 in a game when the boards are clogged and everyone's got their guns at the ready. But I never fail to hear a groan or a sigh when a Soul Ring and Signet hit the table on turn 1. And they're usually hitting together, as in a 2-color deck alone there are anywhere from 5 to 7 2-mana mana rocks, meaning it is much more likely that they will have one of those in hand rather than a Soul Ring, which also, in turn, means that when they do have the Soul Ring, it is very likely that they will have a second rock to drop that same turn, launching them to that important 5 mana. Soul Rings are also incredibly available to the public. There has been one in every single Commander precon with the exception of the Painbow 5-color precon. Things like Mana Vault have a high cost attached to them, so it's unlikely that you will ever encounter it outside of CEDH, but Soul Rings are everywhere. And as it's not listed as a game changer, it can be in any bracket level deck. And while some would argue that it's not as big a deal in a bracket 1 deck as it would be in a bracket 4, it can still catapult a person past everyone else at the table, especially at a table of all bracket 1 decks, as they may have even less ways to remove it than a higher powered table. Commander has a heck of a lot going on when it comes to the ramp game. There's a lot of complicated math that goes into determining your curve, and the combinations at the individual breakpoints are incredibly vast. And then there's Soul Ring, uncontested king of the turn 1 ramp. The card everyone hates to see but loves to play. In all honesty, it is very similar to the One Ring. As long as someone else has it, you want to destroy them, but as soon as you have it, you want to protect it. You may think you might use it for good, but the power will end up being used for conquest. Truthfully, it is quite amusing, but the reality is that it is here to stay. It will never be officially banned, as it will retroactively make almost every single precon illegal. Maybe it will reach game changer status, but it would likely adjust the bracket system as well to keep precons at a bracket 2. The king is here to stay, and there isn't much one can do about it but embrace the precious. Or run earlier artifact, hate to kill it before it becomes too much of a problem. Whichever you choose, best of luck. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I had a lot of fun writing this one up, as the theory behind the mana curve fascinates me. Again, if you want me to do a breakdown of the different mana breakpoints, be sure to let me know down in the comments. And while you are down there, please make sure to like the video, subscribe if you haven't, ring the ding, and all the usual algorithmic devotionals. And until next time, take care of yourselves, everybody.